The engine died without ceremony. No warning light, no dramatic failure, just a soft mechanical surrender, like a final breath escaping metal lungs. Officer Elena Cross felt it before she understood it. The vibration beneath her boots vanished. The faint warmth that had been clinging to the floorboards drained away, as if sucked into the frozen earth below. The steering wheel stiffened under her hands, leather turning unyielding, almost brittle. Her breath fogged the windshield, then lingered longer than it should have. She stared at the dashboard. Dark. The patrol car sat half, buried on the forestry road, swallowed by snow that fell so thick it erased the sky itself. Wind dragged icy fingers across the vehicle, rocking it gently, mockingly, as if testing how much strength remained inside the woman trapped within. Elena reached for the radio. Nothing. She pressed again. Harder this time, thumb numb enough that she barely felt the resistance. The screen flickered once, then went black for good. For several seconds, she simply sat there. Not frozen by fear, not panicking. Listening, not to the storm but to her own body. The way her heartbeat had slowed, heavy and deliberate. The way her fingers tingled, pain blooming first, sharp and insistent, before fading into something far worse. Numbness. She exhaled slowly through her nose, the way she had been trained to do when things went bad. When adrenaline tried to hijack reason. When chaos demanded clarity. Okay, she whispered, though no one could hear it. Okay? The word fogged the air and disappeared. Just like she would, if nothing changed. Elena had responded to the call because no one else would. Dispatch had hesitated when the coordinates came in. The old forestry road was notorious even in summer, unpaved, narrow, twisting through dense woodland where GPS signals weakened and cell service died without apology. Tonight, it was worse. A blizzard had rolled in fast and violent, the kind that meteorologists apologize for afterward. Stranded vehicle. Possible medical emergency. The dispatcher had said, voice tight. Silence followed. Units were closer, units were warmer, units had excuses. Elena hadn't spoken up, she never did. She had simply reached for her keys. By the time she realized the stranded vehicle was gone, tracks erased by snow, darkness pressing in from every direction, it was too late. Her cruiser hit black ice on a blind curve, slid sideways, and surrendered to gravity. She had called it in immediately. Her voice had been calm, professional. I'm off-road, no injuries, vehicle disabled, requesting assistance. The reply had been delayed, then clipped, then hollow. Stand by. Minutes passed, then longer. The cold crept in slowly at first, polite enough to be ignored. It slipped through seams in the door, whispered along the edges of glass, settled into the floor like a patient predator. She called again, static. Then voices faint, distant, not meant for her. Conditions too dangerous to send another unit. Can't risk more vehicles. Log it and revisit after the storm. After the storm. The words sat heavy in her chest, heavier than the cold ever could. They weren't coming. Not because they couldn't. Because they wouldn't. Elena rested her forehead against the steering wheel. The leather burned with cold. Her eyes closed, not in defeat, but in a controlled retreat inward. Anger flared first. Hot, sharp, unfair. Not at the storm. Not at fate. But at the quiet calculation being made somewhere warm and well lit. The math that decided one life was acceptable collateral for convenience. She had known this day might come. Every officer who refused shortcuts did. Integrity had a price, and the bill always arrived when it was least survivable. Her jaw tightened. I did everything right, she whispered. The words tasted bitter. Her body began to betray her next. The shaking grew violent, uncontrollable. Muscles clenched and released without permission. Her teeth chattered so hard her jaw ached. She tried to flex her toes, nothing. Her boots felt like blocks of ice fused to someone else's legs. Hypothermia. She recognized the signs. She forced herself to move, reaching for the emergency blanket in the trunk. The effort felt monumental, like lifting a weight she could barely remember how to hold. When she pushed the door open, snow spilled in immediately, greedy and cold, piling against her knees. The wind stole her breath. She grabbed blindly, fingers brushing plastic, then slipping uselessly as pain flared and vanished again. Too slow, she collapsed back into the seat, chest heaving, vision narrowing at the edges. Darkness crept inward, subtle and seductive. This is how it happens, a detached part of her mind observed, quietly, without witnesses. Her father's face surfaced then, unexpected, unwelcome. He had been a firefighter for 26 years. A man of few words, many scars. He used to sit at the kitchen table after night shifts, hands wrapped around a mug he never drank from, eyes fixed on something far away. "Never leave your people," he had told her once, voice low. "That's the line. Once you cross it, you don't come back." She wondered if he had crossed it before he died. If that was what haunted him. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye, freezing almost instantly against her skin. "I didn't leave anyone," she murmured, unsure who she was speaking to now. "I didn't." The storm answered by rattling the car harder. Miles away, in a house perched at the edge of the same forest, a man who no longer wore a uniform stood barefoot on cold wooden planks and stared into the white void beyond his porch. Caleb Rourke had learned long ago to trust the unease that settled behind his ribs without explanation. It had kept him alive through deserts and mountains, through gunfire and explosions, through decisions that had sent others home in boxes draped with flags. Tonight, that unease was sharp. It pressed against him insistently, refusing to be ignored. Beside him, Atlas paced, nails clicking against the wood. The Belgian Malinois was older now, muzzle dusted with gray, but his eyes were clear, alert. Focused on something invisible beyond the storm, Atlas stopped suddenly. His head snapped toward the forest road. A low sound rumbled in his chest, not a bark, not a growl, but something urgent. A warning. Caleb followed his gaze. The blizzard roared, indifferent to human instincts. But Atlas pulled toward the truck. Hard. Caleb didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat, boots half laced. Movements automatic. He had learned not to question moments like this. War had taught him that hesitation killed more effectively than bullets. They were on the road within minutes, the truck cutting through snow that swallowed landmarks and memory alike. Visibility was a suggestion, nothing more. The world had been reduced to headlights and intuition. Atlas stood rigid in the passenger seat, nose high, eyes locked forward. "You sure, buddy?" Caleb muttered, hands tight on the wheel. Atlas didn't look at him. That was answer enough. Back in the patrol car, Elena's thoughts began to blur. Time stretched and folded in on itself. Memories bled into sensation. The cold no longer hurt, it simply existed, absolute and consuming. Her breathing slowed, too slow. A strange calm settled over her, dangerous in its gentleness. Her muscles relaxed. Her eyelids drooped. This is how people slip away, she realized distantly. Not screaming, not fighting, just letting go. No, the word flared weakly inside her. Not yet. She focused on one thing. The faint outline of her badge reflected in the icy glass. The shield she had polished countless times, the metal worn smooth where her thumb rested unconsciously. She pressed it now, grounding herself. Serve, protect, endure, even if no one was watching. The headlights cut through the storm like a blade. Caleb saw it first. A shape that didn't belong. Too angular, too deliberate. A vehicle. He slammed the brakes, heart hammering, and jumped out before the truck fully stopped. Snow came up to his knees, resistance heavy and punishing. Atlas leapt beside him, already barking, already moving. The patrol car was nearly invisible beneath the snow. Caleb reached the driver's side window and saw her. Still. Too still. Fear punched the air from his lungs. He didn't think. He acted. The glass shattered. Cold air rushed in violently, but he barely noticed. He was already reaching for her. Already wrapping her in his coat, pulling her toward warmth and life with a desperation that surprised even him. Atlas pressed close, body heat immediate, a living barrier against death. Elena stirred, barely. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then slowly sharpened. Confusion flickered, then disbelief. A man, a dog, warmth. Her lips moved. Nothing came out. Caleb leaned close, voice low, steady, unafraid. "I've got you," he said. "You're not alone." Something in her chest broke open then, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to let a single, silent sob escape. Not from fear, from relief. Elena didn't wake all at once. Consciousness returned in fragments, like broken glass drifting slowly into place. First came sensation, pressure against her ribs, steady and solid. Then warmth, spreading not gently but insistently, as if something living refused to let the cold reclaim its territory. Her fingers twitched. Pain followed immediately, sharp and bright, enough to drag a hoarse sound from her throat. It startled her more than the pain itself. The sound proved she was still capable of making one. Her eyes fluttered open. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar. Too close, too dark. It vibrated softly, humming in a low, constant rhythm. For a moment, panic surged. Had she been buried? Was the storm still on top of her? Then she felt it again. Breath, not her own. Warm, rhythmic, alive, brushing against her cheek. She turned her head weakly and met a pair of dark, intelligent eyes watching her with unwavering focus. The dog's face was close enough that she could see frost melting slowly from the edges of his fur. Atlas. She didn't know his name yet, but something ancient and instinctive inside her recognized him as safety. Her gaze shifted again, this time toward the driver's seat. A man sat there, one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly near her shoulder, as if ready to steady her if she slipped away again. His face was carved with quiet lines, not from age but from endurance. His eyes flicked toward her immediately, sharp and assessing, then softened. "You're back," he said quietly. His voice didn't rush, it didn't rise, it didn't beg her to stay conscious, it simply existed solid as a handhold. She swallowed, throat raw, tongue heavy. I was... The words tangled and fell apart. He shook his head gently. "Don't talk yet." Anger flickered through her confusion then. Reflexive. Stubborn. "I need to report." "I know," he said. "Later." There was something in the way he said it, not dismissive, not controlling, that made her stop trying. It felt less like an order and more like a promise. Her eyelids slid shut again, but this time she didn't drift toward darkness. She hovered in a space held up by warmth and motion and the low, constant hum beneath her body. Alive. The realization landed slowly, heavily. Alive. Caleb drove without urgency, but without hesitation. The storm still raged outside the windshield, but the truck felt like a small, defiant island moving against the tide. He had wrapped Alina in every spare layer he owned, coat, blanket, even his own gloves pressed against her hands. Atlas hadn't moved from her side, his body angled protectively, muscles taut beneath fur. Caleb kept one eye on the road and the other on her breathing. Too shallow, but steady. Hypothermia victims could crash without warning. He knew that, had seen it before in mountains, in water, in places where the cold took lives with ruthless patience. He adjusted the heat, slow and careful. Too much. Too fast could kill her just as easily as the storm had almost done. "Stay with us," he murmured, not loudly enough to startle her. "Just stay." Atlas's ears flicked, as if he understood every word. They reached the edge of town just as the sky began to lighten, the storm easing its grip enough to allow the world to exist again. Streetlights glowed like distant stars. Plowed roads appeared, ugly but navigable. At the hospital, everything moved faster. Hands replaced his. Voices layered over one another. Alina was lifted, carried, swallowed by warmth and light. Caleb stepped back, suddenly aware of the ache in his bones, the wet weight of snow in his clothes. Atlas remained seated at his side, eyes fixed on the disappearing gurney. "She'll make it," a nurse said, passing by, already moving on. Caleb nodded once. He had known she would. Alina woke again hours later. This time there was no confusion, only exhaustion so deep it felt structural, as if it had settled into her bones. Her body ached everywhere the cold had touched her, a lingering reminder of how close she had come. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Machines hummed softly, monitoring without accusation. Sunlight filtered through blinds, pale but real. A doctor stood at the foot of her bed, clipboard tucked under his arm. "You're lucky," he said plainly. "Another hour out there and we'd be having a very different conversation." Lucky. The word sparked something sharp inside her. She turned her head toward the window, jaw tightening. "I wasn't lucky," she said hoarsely. "I was abandoned." The doctor paused, then nodded once. "I'll give you a moment," he said, and left. When the door closed, the room felt suddenly too quiet. Her mind replayed the night in fragments, the radio, the voices, the words she wasn't meant to hear. After the storm, the casual way her existence had been deferred, anger surged now, fully awake. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, enduring rage that settled into her chest and refused to leave. She had given 11 years to the job. Missed holidays, missed funerals, missed sleep. She had followed every rule, documented every step, swallowed every insult that came with being difficult. And when she needed them, they had chosen paperwork over a pulse. Her hands curled into fists beneath the blanket. "I won't disappear," she whispered to the empty room. "You don't get to erase me." The department moved quickly once the story began to leak. Not quickly enough to reach her that night. Not quickly enough to save her. But quickly enough to protect itself. A supervisor arrived the next afternoon, expression carefully arranged somewhere between concern and authority. He stood at the foot of her bed, posture stiff, eyes never quite meeting hers. "Officer Cross," he said. We're all relieved you pulled through. She waited. We'll be conducting a review, he continued. Standard procedure. Weather conditions were extreme, as you know. Decisions were made with overall safety in mind. Overall safety. She let the words hang between them. And the radio traffic? She asked quietly. He hesitated. The recordings are being assessed. Am I part of that assessment? She asked. Another pause. Right now, the priority is your recovery. There it was. The same deflection. The same careful language designed to smooth over sharp truths. She met his gaze then, eyes steady despite the exhaustion weighing her down. I remember everything, she said. Every word. Something flickered in his expression, uncertainty, maybe even fear, before he masked it again. We'll be in touch, he said, already stepping back. When he left, the room felt colder. Caleb heard about the visit 2 hours later. He sat in the hospital cafeteria, Atlas at his feet, coffee untouched in his hands. The nurse who told him tried to sound reassuring. They're just doing their job, she said. Caleb looked down at the dark liquid swirling in the cup. So was she, he replied. He stood, decision already made. Elena was staring at the ceiling when he knocked. She turned her head, surprised, and saw him standing in the doorway, coat clean now, posture relaxed but alert. Atlas sat beside him, tail thumping once against the floor. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then she exhaled, something uncoiling inside her chest. You came back, she said. I said I would, Caleb replied. She studied him, searching for something: judgment, expectation, curiosity. There was none. Why? She asked. He considered the question carefully. Because people shouldn't vanish just because it's inconvenient to notice them. The words settled into her like an anchor. She nodded once. Atlas padded forward, resting his head gently against the side of her bed. She reached out instinctively, warm fur. Thank you, she said, voice steady now. Both of you. Caleb shook his head slightly. No, he said. Thank you for holding on. Outside the hospital, snow melted slowly into slush. Inside, something far more dangerous was beginning to thaw. Truth, and truth, once warm again, had a way of moving. The first thing Elena noticed when she returned to the station was not the looks. It was the quiet. Not the respectful kind. Not the heavy, shared silence that followed tragedy. This was thinner, sharper. The kind that slipped between conversations and cut without ever raising its voice. Doors closed a second too early. Conversations softened when she passed. Someone laughed down the hall and then abruptly stopped, as if remembering she was there. Elena walked through it all with her shoulders straight and her chin level. She had learned long ago that silence could be a weapon, but it could also be armor. Her boots echoed against the tiled floor, the sound too loud in the stillness. She felt every step in her bones, a dull ache that reminded her she was not fully healed, no matter what the medical clearance said. Cold injuries lingered. They hid in joints, waited for quiet moments to announce themselves. She welcomed the pain. Pain meant she was still here. At her locker, she paused. Someone had moved her things. Not taken them, not vandalized them. Just shifted them slightly, enough to say you don't quite belong where you used to. Her jaw tightened. 11 years, and this was how loyalty was measured. She opened the locker slowly, deliberately, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rush. Inside, her uniform hung crisp and untouched. Her badge gleamed dully in the fluorescent light. She stared at it for a long moment, before pinning it back onto her chest. Serve, protect, endure. The words no longer felt ceremonial, they felt defiant. The review board convened 3 days later. Elena sat alone at one end of the long table, hands folded, posture impeccable. Across from her sat men and women who had never known what it felt like to have frost creep into their bloodstream, who had never calculated how many minutes of consciousness they had left. They spoke carefully. Policy, protocol, risk assessment. Elena answered when spoken to. Nothing more. Nothing less. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She did not plead. She described the facts with the same precision she had used in her reports for over a decade. Timestamps, radio traffic, temperature drops. When asked how she felt during the incident, she paused. Cold, she said simply. A few of them shifted uncomfortably. One man cleared his throat. Emotionally. Officer Cross, she met his gaze. I felt disposable. The word landed harder than any accusation. Silence followed. Outside the room, the station buzzed with speculation. Some officers avoided her entirely. Others offered quiet nods. Brief words of support delivered in hallways where no one else could hear. Glad you made it. One murmured, eyes darting away immediately afterward. Another said nothing, just pressed a cup of coffee into her hand and walked away. The divide was clear. Loyalty, it turned out, was conditional. Caleb watched it all from a distance. He sat in his truck across the street from the station more than once, Atlas beside him, observing the way Elena entered and exited the building. He didn't intervene. Didn't announce himself. He knew institutions well enough to understand their reflexes. They close ranks. They minimize damage. They wait for storms to pass. But he also knew something else. Storms didn't end just because people pretended the sky was clear. The first leak hit the local news quietly. A short segment. No names. No accusations. Sources confirm an internal review following the near-fatal exposure of an officer during last week's blizzard. Near-fatal. Elena watched it from her couch. Wrapped in a blanket Atlas had claimed as his own during his visits. The wording made her stomach twist. Near-fatal sounded accidental. It sounded like weather. She muted the television and stared at the dark screen, seeing her reflection layered over the empty living room. She looked thinner, sharper. Older in a way time alone could not explain. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I heard what happened. You didn't deserve it. Be careful. No name. She deleted it without replying. Careful had never saved anyone. That night the cold returned in her dreams. Not as snow or ice, but as space. Endless, empty space where voices drifted out of reach and help existed only as an idea. She woke with a gasp, heart racing, the phantom ache of numb limbs clinging to her. Atlas lifted his head immediately, moving closer without sound, grounding her with warmth and weight. She pressed her face into his fur and let the tears come. Not loud, not dramatic. Just enough to release the pressure that had been building since the night she'd been left to die. I'm still here, she whispered into the darkness. I'm still here. Atlas breathed steadily, as if counting the truth of it for her. The department's tone shifted the following week. Not publicly. Internally, her calls were reassigned. Her schedule changed without explanation. Desk work replaced patrol. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Disappear quietly. Elena accepted every change without protest. That worried them more than resistance would have. She showed up early. Left late. Filed immaculate reports. Documented everything. Silence, she had learned, did not mean passivity. It meant preparation. Caleb received a call from an old contact 2 days later. Your name's come up, the voice said. Caleb closed his eyes. That's never good news. They're trying to frame it as unavoidable. Weather, chain of command confusion, no malicious intent, tightened on the phone. And the recordings. A pause. Missing segments. Of course. Caleb exhaled slowly. Find them, he said. They don't just vanish. The town council meeting was standing room only. Elena hadn't planned to attend. She disliked public spectacles, disliked the way pain was often consumed as entertainment. But Caleb had called that morning, voice firm. They're speaking tonight, he said. About emergency response funding, about safety. Safety. She went. She sat in the back unnoticed at first. The speakers droned on about budgets and preparedness, about lessons learned and future improvements. Words without weight. Then someone in the crowd stood. A woman, middle-aged, wrapped in a thick winter coat. My daughter's a nurse, she said, voice trembling but strong. She works nights. Drives alone in storms. If something happened to her, would you leave her too? The room shifted. Murmurs rippled outward. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Another person stood, then another. Stories spilled out, not accusations. Questions simple. Human, uncomfortable. Elena remained seated, hands clasped, eyes forward. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Outside, reporters gathered. Questions sharpened. Elena slipped away before anyone noticed, heart pounding not with fear, but with something dangerously close to hope. Later that night, Caleb knocked on her door. He didn't speak immediately. He just handed her a small flash drive. Found them, he said. Her fingers closed around it. The weight felt enormous. What happens now, she asked. Caleb met her gaze steadily. Now, he said. They have to decide who they really are. Elena nodded slowly. For the first time since the storm, she allowed herself a small, fierce smile. Good, she said. So do I. Outside, winter loosened its grip. But the reckoning had only just begun. The flash drive felt heavier than it should have. Elena turned it over in her hand, the small piece of plastic and metal warm from her palm, yet carrying a cold weight that pressed against her ribs. Evidence always felt like that, compact, unassuming, and capable of tearing lives apart once released. She didn't plug it in right away. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table, Atlas lying at her feet, head resting on his paws, but eyes never fully closed. The room smelled faintly of coffee gone cold and winter coats drying near the heater. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, slush dripping from rooftops in a slow, steady rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. It sounded like time counting down. When she finally connected the drive to her laptop, the screen flickered, then filled with audio files, dates, times, unit numbers. Her heart began to pound, not fast but deep, each beat heavy with recognition. She clicked the first file. Her own voice filled the room, clear, professional. Unit 12, I'm off-road. Vehicle disabled, no injuries. Requesting assistance. She remembered saying it. Remembered how normal it had felt at the time, how certain she had been that help would come. Then other voices followed. Unfiltered. We can't spare another unit. Conditions are too bad. Log it and move on. She's stable. She can wait. Alina closed her eyes. The words cut deeper now than they had in the moment, stripped of context and excuses. Laid bare in their indifference. Atlas lifted his head, ears angling toward the sound, a low rumble vibrating in his chest as if he sensed the threat hidden inside those voices. I know, Alina murmured, reaching down to touch his fur. I know. She let the recordings play through once, only once. That was all she could endure. When she opened her eyes again, the anger was there, but it had changed. It was no longer wild. It was focused. The story broke the next morning, not as rumor, not as speculation, as fact. The audio leaked through channels no one could fully control, first to an independent journalist, then to regional outlets, then beyond. The voices were unmistakable. The timestamps damning. Officer left without assistance during life-threatening conditions. Audio reveals command decision to delay rescue. Questions raised about departmental accountability. Elena watched the headlines scroll across her phone, feeling strangely detached. This was no longer just her story. It belonged to anyone who had ever trusted a system to value their life. Her phone rang, then rang again. She didn't answer. At the station, panic set in quietly. Meetings were called behind closed doors. Statements were drafted, redrafted, stripped of responsibility. Supervisors who had once avoided Elena's gaze now spoke her name with forced familiarity. We're all on the same side here. Elena sat through it all with the same stillness she had carried through the storm. When she was asked to make a public statement, she declined. Silence, again, was her choice, and it infuriated them. Caleb was less insulated. His name surfaced quickly, pulled from hospital records and whispered connections. A former Navy SEAL involved in unauthorized rescue. Questions raised about civilian interference. He read the articles without expression, Atlas at his side, tail thumping faintly whenever Caleb's hand brushed his head. They're circling, Caleb muttered. Atlas huffed softly. Caleb had expected scrutiny. He had lived under it before. What surprised him was how quickly the tone turned. Not grateful, not curious. Defensive. It reminded him of debrief rooms long ago, when mistakes had been buried beneath layers of classification and pride. When truth had been treated as an inconvenience. He exhaled slowly. So be it. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Public, televised. Elena stood in front of her mirror the morning of, adjusting her uniform with steady hands. She looked different than she had a month ago, leaner, eyes sharper, presence heavier. Survivors carried weight no one else could see. Atlas watched from the doorway, head tilted slightly as if memorizing her. She knelt in front of him, resting her forehead briefly against his. Wish me luck, she whispered. Atlas licked her cheek once, solemn and deliberate. The chamber was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Cameras hummed softly. Officials sat rigid behind polished desks, expressions neutral but tight. Elena took her seat at the witness table alone. No attorney at her side. No prepared statement, just her. When asked to recount the events of the night, she spoke clearly, without embellishment. She described the storm, the crash, the cold. She described the radio calls and the waiting. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. When they played the audio, the room went still. People shifted. Some looked down. Others stared at the speakers as if hoping the voices would deny themselves. They did not. When it was over, the panel chair cleared his throat. Officer Cross, he said carefully, why didn't you abandon your vehicle and seek shelter? Elena met his gaze. Because protocol told me not to, she said. And because I believed my department would not abandon me. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Caleb testified next. He wore no uniform, just a plain jacket, his posture relaxed but unyielding. Atlas lay at his feet, still as stone. I wasn't acting as a SEAL, Caleb said when asked. I was acting as a human being. A murmur rippled through the room. He described the unease that had driven him into the storm, the sight of the buried patrol car, the condition Elena had been in. She wasn't panicking, he said. She wasn't reckless. She was enduring. And she was running out of time. When asked whether he believed the department had made a reasonable decision, Caleb paused. No, he said simply. Silence followed, not hostile. Reverent. Outside crowds gathered, not to protest, to stand. People held signs, not slogans, just words. She deserved backup, no one left behind. Silence isn't safety. Elena saw them through the windows as she exited the chamber, breath catching unexpectedly in her chest. She hadn't asked for this, but she accepted it. That night the department issued a statement. Apologies were made. Resignations announced, policies revised. None of it erased the night in the storm, but it acknowledged it. And sometimes, acknowledgement was the first form of justice. Elena returned home exhausted, body heavy with the aftermath of truth. Caleb stood by her door, Atlas beside him. It's not over, he said quietly. She nodded. I know. But for the first time since the engine had died beneath her, she felt something she hadn't dared to name before. Vindication. The storm had passed. Now came the reckoning. The cold never fully left Elena Cross. It lingered in quiet ways, in the ache behind her knees on winter mornings, in the way her fingers stiffened when the air turned sharp, in the pause she took before stepping into any darkness that felt too empty. Survival left marks that time did not erase. It only taught them where to live. But something else remained too, strength. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demanded recognition. The kind forged when a person learned, without witnesses, that they could endure abandonment and still choose integrity. The department changed after the hearings. On paper first, policies were rewritten with bold language and careful clauses. Emergency response protocols expanded, redundancies added. Training sessions scheduled and rescheduled. Accountability committees formed with names that sounded reassuring. But institutions were slow learners. People were not. Elena felt it the first day she returned to patrol. She walked into the locker room early, before the shift change, the building still half asleep. The air smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. She moved to her locker. This time, nothing had been shifted. Her gear sat exactly where she had left it. She dressed in silence, every movement practiced, deliberate. The uniform felt heavier than it once had, not because of fear but because of what it now carried. Meaning, memory, expectation. As she stepped out onto the floor, footsteps echoed behind her. Then stop. She didn't turn. Officer Cross. The voice belonged to a young officer she barely knew. He stood rigid, uncertain, hands clenched at his sides. I just wanted to say, he swallowed. I'm glad you're back. She turned then. Looked at him carefully. Thank you, she said. The simplicity of it seemed to steady him. Word spread quietly after that. Not gossip. Recognition. Doors opened again. Conversations resumed, not cautiously now, but honestly. Some apologies came haltingly. Others never came at all. Elena didn't demand them. She didn't need to. Her presence was answer enough. Caleb Rourke didn't attend the ceremony when the department formally acknowledged his actions. He hadn't planned to go. Public recognition made him uneasy, always had. He had learned long ago that applause faded faster than consequences. But Elena had asked him. Not with urgency, with respect. So he stood at the back of the crowd, Atlas at his side, as officials spoke into microphones about bravery and community and shared responsibility. His name was mentioned. Applause followed. He nodded once, nothing more. Atlas sat calmly, unbothered by the noise, eyes scanning the crowd with quiet vigilance. When Elena stepped forward to speak, the room stilled. She didn't read from notes. She didn't thank the department. She didn't dramatize her survival. She spoke plainly. I was trained to trust that when things went wrong, help would come, she said. That belief almost cost me my life. A ripple passed through the crowd. But I'm here today because someone who owed me nothing chose to act anyway. Not because of rank, not because of policy. Because he listened, to instinct, to humanity, to the idea that no one should be left alone in the dark. Her gaze found Caleb at the back of the room, and because of that, she continued, I'm still standing, still serving, still believing that silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes, it means we're waiting for the right moment to speak. She stepped back. The applause that followed was not thunderous. It was steady, sincere. That night, Elena and Caleb sat on her porch, the air crisp but clear, winter loosening its grip at last. Atlas lay between them, content, tail thumping softly against the wood. Neither spoke for a long time. The quiet felt earned. You know, Elena said finally, staring out into the dark. There were moments in that car when I thought maybe this is it. Maybe this is how it ends. Caleb nodded. I've seen that look, he said. In a lot of eyes. She turned to him. What made you come? She asked again, not out of curiosity now, but understanding. Caleb thought for a moment. Because I've been on the other side of that silence, he said. And I promised myself I'd never ignore it again. Elena absorbed that. Thank you, she said. Not as a formality. As a truth. He inclined his head slightly. Atlas shifted closer to her, warm and solid. Spring arrived slowly. Snow retreated into shadows. Roads cleared. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. But something had changed beneath the surface, subtle and irreversible. Elena noticed it during routine calls, when backup arrived faster than expected. When radios stayed open longer. When officers checked in not because policy required it, but because conscience did. The system hadn't transformed overnight. But cracks had formed, and through those cracks humanity showed itself. Months later, Elena stood once more on the forestry road. Not alone this time. The trees were bare, the ground muddy where snow had once buried everything. She stood beside her cruiser, engine running, radio alive with quiet chatter. She breathed in the cold air. It no longer frightened her. It reminded her. She looked down the road, imagining the storm, the darkness, the stillness. She remembered the moment she had chosen to stay awake. To endure. She remembered warmth breaking through the cold. No one left behind. She got back into her car and drove away. Some stories end with justice. Others end with peace. This one ended with something quieter. A reminder that systems fail, that storms come, that silence can be deadly. But also this, that one person listening, one person acting, one person refusing to look away, can change the ending. If this story moved you, share where you're watching from and what part stayed with you the longest. And if you believe stories of silent strength deserve to be told, subscribe. Because somewhere right now someone is waiting in the cold. And what matters most is who shows up.